VenomousStare back with another 2v2 cast. We have Savagewood in the bottom part of the map, and his ally, who is a random, is Guard Marine. And they're going to be facing off against Bakken and Bacalo, who is actually here. He's just really dim and didn't move his Overlord immediately. Now Savagewood has played about 6 games in the last hour in 2v2. This is me, Savagewood. And in his first game of the day, he got Guard Marine on Shrines of Linzul as his ally. He said cheese, did a Ling Bane bust, single-handedly won the game as Guard Marine went for a 2-gate, 1-robo build where he was floating money, getting supply blocked, and not really contributing much at all. After the game, I told this guy you can support 4 gates off of 1 base, and I told this to him while we were in the game too. I said add extra gates. He did the typical thing that anyone under the age of 15 years of age does whenever they're confronted with someone better than them trying to help them, and that's tell them to fuck off, and in some way they will put a character somewhere in the word fuck to make sure the chat filter doesn't block it, because even though the game's been out for 9 years, they're too dim-witted to turn the chat filter off. So this guy told me to fuck off, and then he blocked me. We proceeded to get queued together a bunch more times as allies, and we won a bunch of games in a row. And then last game, he was against me in an exciting match, and I easily beat him. And we were bantering about that in the beginning of the match. So essentially, I'm this guy's maker, you know. If he has me on his team, he wins. If he's against me, he loses. Savagewood here is going for a 1-Rax expand with a bunker, defending this neutral choke. This neutral choke is incredibly important to defend in 2v2. Really the only thing that this build isn't good against is Reaper or Reaper Cheese, because you're going to defend anything that comes at the front pretty easily. Whether it be heavy barracks aggression, attempted Hellion aggression, Protoss warp gate aggression, you know, Zerg, Ling run-bys. This is very powerful to build this bunker here because of course you start to build your next depots by this bunker to sort of funnel it in and make it a full wall. Generally in StarCraft, one thing that is sort of not paid attention to enough is the fact that as Terran, your depots can actually be sort of a weapon. Now I'm not saying you like build them over here at your opponent's third. When I mean a weapon, you can actually use weapons defensively. Weapon isn't an inherently aggressive thing, as we see Guard Marine going for a Stargate here, which is going to be scouted by Bakken. Now I played with Bakken last game. He was my ally whenever I defeated Guard Marine. And Bakken is going to go for an eBay here and get a turret because of course the Stargate was scouted. Bacalo, the Zerg player, is just pumping drones. Now notice how much of a foothold that this bunker establishes along with the depots. This really stymies a lot of the nonsense that can go on early in this map, because even though the Reaper is good at dipping and diving whenever you dedicate a lot to this forward wall in, you're going to be able to defend a lot of different cheeses and more importantly secure your natural. In StarCraft 2, in the 2v2 map pool, there are 2 different kinds of maps. There's split base maps where you spawn on different plateaus as your ally, which is what we see here. But there's also shared bases where you spawn together. On split maps, aggressive play is much more powerful. Cheese is much more powerful. But on maps like this, you can actually mitigate the fact that you're split base by building stuff out here at the front door. And that's what we see here. Oftentimes in StarCraft 2v2, your build is not necessarily as important in terms of efficiency, because what matters a lot more is making sure that you and your ally are able to secure their expansion. In 1v1, the game has been out for a long time. Pro gamers have been diligently slaving away at what is the best way to open in the early game. What's the most efficient way where you can cut the most amount of corners? 2v2 isn't really like that. A lot of times you can actually take a hit early on to play a more conservative, safe style in the early game, especially when it comes to Sim City. It's not just a matter of getting a lot of units and not expanding, but very often it's about communicating with your ally and talking about where you're going to put yourself put your stuff, it is sort of yourself, I guess, too, since it's your units. But talking about where you're going to put your stuff to mitigate early game harassment or early game cheeses. Remember, frequently in 2v2, especially if it's split base like this, see how he has his own main here? It's this little plateau, and then there is sort of a shared neutral low ground, and then another big plateau. This is split base. So the thing about split base is your opponents can 2v1 one person, isolate them, kill them, and kill the other. So frequently in the early game, a lot of what you want to be aiming to do is to minimize the amount of different aggressive options your opponent has to split base, isolate you. Really, Mass Reaper, air, and some sort of elevator drop play is the thing that's going to counter a very dedicated front door like this. Notice the wall is complete for Savagewood. He's adding a turret. You always want to add a turret in your walls like this. As you see some light Phoenix harass here from Guard Marine. He's going to scout the tanks. And this is just one factory tank. Notice that Stim is very late. That is a result of going for this factory so quickly. Bakken has also made a few turrets to defend against the Protoss air, and he has a third. Savagewood's third is about halfway done. And if we go to income here, Savagewood and his ally are doing well, and the enemy Zerg player is about where you would expect him to be, even. So really, Bakken has dedicated a lot to this early game tank play and has fallen a little bit behind. You always want to be diligently double pumping SCVs and have them rally to your natural. You want to get 3 in each gas in your main, 16 on minerals, and then have them double rally to the natural. That's macro 101, frankly. Command center is being built here. On this map, I do actually favor building a planetary fortress in this location. Generally, Terran players do want to build 3 orbitals so they can mule hammer very effectively, but on this map the third base is so exposed and it can be attacked from so many directions that I actually do like the third to be a PF here. And frequently what you see is this third base will be aggressed upon, and if you are able to hold, your opponent does have a lot of room to drop in the main. This turret is actually very nice. I like to call these Catalina third bases after the map Catalina, because basically what a Catalina third is it is a third base that is pretty exposed, that is directly below a huge cliff that is your main base. So basically that means that if your opponent presses up and pressures your third, they can always pick up and just easily drop into your main. So on Catalina third bases, it's very important to have a little bit of anti-air, whether it be a spore or a turret. You want to have it sort of at the cusp of your plateau in the main, as we see a little bit of a mine drop going on here for Savagewood. But you just want to have some anti-air there, whether it be a spore or a turret, because it prevents your opponent from pushing right here and then just doing an easy lift off up into the main. Savagewood will run away after doing a little bit of damage with the mines. Savagewood does have an extra factory, and he has drilling claws, so that means that Savagewood is going for a Widow Mine heavy play here. Notice he does have his starport out. He's making medevacs whenever he can. He's trying to establish his third, which he made a PF. Notice that Bakken is defending his third base with some siege tanks here, and he's taking a fourth. Bacalo, despite having a lot of money, doesn't have enough drones here, and he's already trying to take a fourth, which is fine. The fourth goes down for Bacalo, and Savagewood has a nice little Sim City here, and he's going to shift-click some mines around and trying to get some map control. This is smart because once you have about 4 mines in one spot, it is a huge trap that can do a lot of damage. And one thing that Terran players don't really do enough is hide their mines around the map just for map control. It is worth noting that this is actually absolutely worthless unless you get the mine upgrade drilling clause, because your opponent will just run into it and then kill it. Nice scan there by Bakken to snipe the mine before it goes off. Guard Marine does have an OBS here. In general, I would say that you want to put the OBS in siege mode. Notice it just dies there anyway. One thing that Protoss players sort of underestimate is the hallucination ability. because you can just hallucinate one Phoenix and shift click it around the bases and get an easy scout. It's much safer than making an OBS and trying to run it around the base and not run into spores. But the OBS is still very powerful, and we see Savage Wood. He's going to press up a bit here, burrow his mines, do some damage to tanks, and back off here. Now, mines are very good against Zerg, especially Zerglings. But one thing that you run into is if you're doing a mine style against a lot of range units, it can be difficult because the range units will just kill the mines before they get a shot off. And Bakken is trying to pressure the blue team, but with quite a few mines out as well as a hefty Protoss army, that'll be a little bit difficult. Savage Wood did burrow a mine out here to get control of this fourth base, and the Protoss army is going to come in here, a few storms going down, and Savage Wood intelligently drops just outside of the base. That means he's going to be able to stem in and surprise his Zerg opponent whenever he wants to. There comes the stem. And Savage Wood does have 2-2. He's working on 3-3. And anytime the Terran player gets a 2-upgrade advantage over the Zerg, it can be very difficult for the Zerg to trade. And Savage Wood is going to snipe the base and run away. And he's going to focus fire these mutas here because he doesn't think he's going to be able to get away. And he does kill a decent amount of mutas. Remember, mutas are 100-100, very expensive harassment units that aren't good in straight up fights. And you want to preserve those if you're Zerg. You don't want to be very aggressive and trade them out for Marines. It's just not worth it. Remember, you get the Spires so late as Zerg where you're never going to be able to compete upgrade-wise with your Terran opponent. Of course, you don't want to trade mutas versus Marines even if your mutas are like 2-1, which a lot of the times if you go for a muta style, getting 2-1 is like, wow, holy crap, he's really upgrading his muta as well. He has 2 attack and 1 defense. A lot of times the Spire finishes, you get the +1 attack and that's it for the Zerg. They'll either transition to something else or just forget to get the other ups. But this 3-3 will be big for Savage Wood. It really can't be understated how much this helps Marines. Savage Wood is trying to take a fourth. Now with mutas out, you do want to throw down a couple extra turrets here. And Savage Wood, it looks like he's going to go for more drop play. The mutas are going to fly into the base as the Protoss army tries to clear this little contain that the Terran had set up. The blue Protoss player Guard Marine and Bakken are even in upgrades. And the mutas are going to do some significant damage here over at the fourth. Savage Wood will move his Marine mine down. Now he'll probably leave a few mines over here just to prevent the Zerg from trying to attack again. And the Zerg is very luckily, oh, he's going to actually catch one. A mine, that is. Savage Wood, with this 3 medevacs, is going to leave one at the fourth, and he's going to bring the other one in the main. That was a little bit sloppy, should have aimed to land right here. Loses both medevacs. And the drop is going to do insignificant damage, but this is why you split your forces, because Savage Wood does pick off the fourth base again, and limiting the Zerg's bases, and specifically their 7th and 8th gas, is extraordinarily important, and Savage Wood does escape with one of the drops. So that is worth it when things are said and done, because Savage Wood gets a base. He's going to move out onto creep and clear it. Another incredibly important thing against Zerg. He has a ton of mines, notice. The Lurkers are going to siege. Lurkers are very good against mines, but the mutas just take a ton of damage there, and most of them do fall. Now again, mines aren't that good against units like Hydras and Lurkers for this exact reason. Savage Wood's going to try to move the Lurkers in, or the mines in rather, but it just doesn't work. They're eviscerated by the Lurkers. And here comes the Terran army, which takes a good amount of damage through the mines. And thankfully, Guard Marine, who told Savage Wood to fuck off for giving him basic advice, is going to press while Savage Wood gets 2v1. Savage Wood loses his fourth. Probably should have left a few token mines there, but you can see he had built a couple turrets. And at this point, Savage Wood is basically out of medevacs, which just makes it terrible whenever you're trying to play bio. One thing you should do on maps where they have sprawling bases that go around the corners is shift-click one unit out of your control group to check for corner bases. Had the Protoss player done this, this base would have been crushed, and the blue team would be in a much better position. But as it stands, this PF for Bakken is probably going to be established, and it's going to be able to be mule hammered. Now if we look back in Camp Savage Wood, he's adding more racks. Notice he has 3 factories to make mines with. he should get this defensive upgrade for his mechanical units, though. It is very important whenever you're going mines, actually. Bacalo has gotten a little bit of a foothold here in the middle of the map with his lurker spread. That's going to make it very hard to push up the middle. And if Guard Marine had better map control, he would make sure that this base and this base would never be able to be taken. The mechanical armor is started for Savagewood. This is important. One thing that people forget is the mechanical armor, it just doesn't affect your fighting factory units like Thors and mines and tanks and Hellbats, but it helps your medevacs too. And medevac retention is very important, especially against Zerg. And whenever you get into these knockdown, drag-out fights, the difference between having 2 armor upgrades for your medevacs and having no upgrades is just astronomical. It's very, very helpful. A few lurkers are out here for Bacalo. He was probably checking for this base. Maybe he peeked down here and didn't see anything. It looks like at this point he's going to try to move the lurkers either back to the center of the map, and it looks like he's going to try to rejoin, but Savagewood sees them and picks them off. That's a lot of gas that he just lost. And Savagewood knows that this army is going to be able to easily deal with his Marines, so he stems the 3-3 Marines forward, stutter steps perfectly away from the army, dumping out as much damage as possible, and actually does a good job of sniping the hatch again there. And Savagewood, he's going to try to burrow some mines, and Bakken is going to do a lot of work here. As Bacalo says, LOL, the Toss army comes from the west side, and the Toss army can get some nice storms down on this mostly Hydra army, but he sort of runs backwards. Notice he has an insane amount of minerals being floated. Imagine how much stronger this army would be with 20 more zealots. This is why floating money is so bad and so important that you spend your money correctly, because this push would be an absolute laughingstock if the blue player, Guard Marine, had just spent his resources appropriately. And as it stands, Savagewood again is going to get attacked by multiple people with little help. This base is trying to be re-established by Bacalo. The Hydra army will run up here and snipe down the PF. We need to see some big storms here from Guard Marine. And he does some okay storms on the Libs, but these Hydras are so weak against storm. And finally we see some nice ones coming down. As with a couple Colossi, these Hydras are just going to get eviscerated. Medevacs, of course, heal all biological units, including Zealots, so they were actually helpful there. This base has been up for a while. This base has been established. So the blue team is at a little bit of a disadvantage as Guard Marine starts to push out and clear the creep. Now, if you look at this army, it looks like, well, he's going to be able to be defended by lurkers and libs. Again, this guy is floating so much money and he's been harassed so little that he could easily be maxed. Very scary. But as it stands, Savagewood, who has been repeatedly tag teamed all game, is going to throw in his reserves, a few liberators, a few mines. Nice storms going down onto the Hydras from Guard Marine. Guard Marine, the random player, is wreaking down havoc with his Observer Colossus mix. His ally Savagewood is really backing him up with Liberators here, as there just isn't a whole lot of support here for these very, very expensive Protoss units. But when it comes to Liberation Zones, it is very hard to engage, and the Zerg's third base is in dire straits. It is probably dead. The fourth base will be able to be segmented off. It is also very vulnerable. Notice a little bit of Colossus poke there, but Guard Marine just ran back into the Liberator mine, and there's really no way for the red team to engage. Savagewood has retaken this base, and he's making another base to float to here. The Zerg third does fall, and this fourth base, despite the spines, is not long for this world. Now, an intelligent player would send a little bit of harassment over here if possible, although they are planetary fortresses, so maybe it would not work. But the key to stopping these bases is to smash them before they get established. Once your opponent has a PF with a few turrets, it can be sort of hard to break with harassment. Remember, this base has been up for all day and then some. Protoss player is going to go down here after Savagewood sees the mineral line. And notice that Savagewood is always cutting off the path that the red team can use to defend the bases. Liberator Mine is incredibly difficult to run into. Liberator alone can be scary, but when you mix in Widow Mines with +2 defense as well as the Drilling Claws upgrade, Tunneling Claws, whatever, it's very, very difficult. This is a style that we saw Alive use to great effect versus Scarlet in the GSL. Mikalo leaves, the guy who typed LOL, for whatever reason. And Savagewood doesn't have a great economy here. He's just now getting this base sort of popping and working. Carriers with no upgrades at all are going to be gunned down, but again, they're supported by the mines. And what do you know? The Protoss player is covered by the Terran player. His retreat path is completely sealed off by his ally. And despite the fact that Bakken does have a nice little base income in the top left of the map, he's going to have a hard time winning this game. As more Liberators are coming out for Savagewood, they're doing some damage to Vikings. Savagewood just has a plethora of Liberators here. He's going to siege onto the tanks while the Zealots run forward. And if we look at the upgrades, there is speed for the Zealots, and the Zealots are going to crush forward and destroy the tanks of Bakken, and Bakken leaves. As we see here that Lings were trying to be used to attack these corner bases, but with 2 PFs, that's no big deal. And Savagewood uses a Liberator Mine style in conjunction with this Protoss ally to vanquish his red opponents. One of the key elements of this game was the constant denial of this 4th base, as well as the pressuring in general of the Zerg. Make sure you subscribe for more.